Welcome back to our program. Henry Waxman is on the line with us. Congressman Henry Waxman. He has a new book out. It is called The Waxman Report, How Congress Really Works, written with Joshua Green. And Congressman, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you.
Christy Harvey, who's a regular on our show, refers to you admiringly as the mustache of justice.
Yes, that's very funny, very amusing.
I think it's an honorific. It's and we all honor so much of the work that you've done.
Thank you.
A couple of questions. Back in 1994, as a consequence of your efforts, and God bless you for it. You got a bunch of tobacco executives in front of Congress, and this is what they had to say.
Please consider yourself to be under oath. Yes or no? Do you believe nicotine is not addictive?
I believe nicotine is not addictive, yes.
Congressman, cigarettes and nicotine clearly do not meet the classic definitions of addiction.
I don't believe that nicotine or our products are addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive. I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
And I, too, believe that nicotine is not addictive.
Now, as a consequence of that beginning, we now have some legislation that is beginning the process of regulating tobacco through the FDA and perhaps, winding down on the 400,000 plus deaths every year in the United States from tobacco. And I salute you for that, sir. I'm curious, though, why those 7 men are not in prison for lying to Congress.
I thought they were clearly lying, but it was up to the Justice Department to decide whether it was perjury, which is the criminal charge. And as you might have heard, they used words like classic definition of addiction or whatever. But the Justice Department didn't prosecute them. But that hearing, and I write about this in the book, was a turning point for tobacco.
Yeah,
even without legislation, American people saw the face of the tobacco industry, middle-aged men who were willing to stand and hold their right hand and promise to tell the truth and immediately lied, not only about nicotine being addicting, but the connection of cigarette smoking to lung cancer and heart disease, the fact that they could manipulate and did manipulate the nicotine levels to keep people hooked, and also that they were targeting kids 12, 13, 14 years of age to try to get them to start smoking, even though there's no place in the country where state laws allow them to go out and legally buy cigarettes.
Right.
But I think when the public saw how cynical these executives were and learned about the things that the tobacco industry had kept hidden, the reality that non-smokers are subjected to bad health consequences just from being in the presence of smokers. That changed things. States all over the country have adopted no smoking laws in public places.
Even if I didn't get my satisfaction in watching Lou Gerstner go to jail instead of going off to IBM where he screwed a bunch of employees, the country is the better for it nonetheless. I get it and I agree with you. And
we finally did get legislation,
yes,
which will mean we can go even further when the FDA starts regulating the marketing of these cigarettes.
Just in the last few months. Can I move along to cap and trade?
Yes.
You've been very involved with cap and trade, and we had Congressman DeFazio on the show last week, who is a friend of yours. You guys know each other quite well, and I believe. And I have tremendous respect for him. He voted against the cap-and-trade legislation because, number one, he said it outlaws the current ability of the federal government to regulate carbon dioxide, and number two, that by giving away 80%, 85% of the carbon credits, we're basically just giving a giant gift to Goldman Sachs. Your response?
Well, I disagree with him, and I'm sorry to see him vote against this bill, because the alternative, if this bill hadn't passed, would be nothing. It would be exactly where we are today. And we have 3 clear objectives in that legislation. One, to make our country more independent from having to import foreign oil. It's a threat to our national security. We wanted to provide millions of new jobs as we drive the technology to reduce the carbon in many of the industries in this country. And then thirdly, to do something where we actually insist that there be the reductions to stop the impact on global warming, which is a threat more serious than the scientists originally imagined. Mm-hmm. So we tried to do that, but we tried to do it in a way that brought together a coalition of business and environmentalists. I think what we saw from Peter is he has a notion of the perfect. Right. And I think sometimes the perfect can be the enemy of the good, and the alternative is not the perfect. The alternative is the status quo, which is really unacceptable.
But why give away 85% when the European experience seems to indicate that may not be optimal, and why ban the EPA from regulating carbon dioxide after the Supreme Court went so far as to rule that the EPA had the right to do so? Why ban it?
The decision by the Supreme Court that said that under the Clean Air Act, the EPA must regulate carbon emissions under that law if they found that it was harmful to health or the environment, is a driving force to get industry to say that it's better to pass our law than to leave the EPA in charge. Mm-hmm. The EPA really is not equipped to do the kind of regulation that would be effective. It would be ham-handed and heavy-handed and not get to what we need to do. So we said, let's do this law with a way of achieving the reductions, insisting that we actually get the reductions, not have EPA trying to monitor and regulate every facility in the country.
Right.
We try to give the incentives to hold down the carbon emissions in the least costly way to our economy. Now, we didn't give away allowances like we're giving away something. We said to the utilities, you won't have to pay for these allowances, which means you will have to protect the electricity ratepayers and not charge them because you're getting those allowances.
Well, you could
free.
argue that they're protecting their stockholders just as much. I mean, either they're going to pass it along to the ratepayers, or they're going to reduce their profits.
Well, they can't pass it on to the ratepayers, and it isn't that they're relieved of their obligation to reduce the carbon. They still must achieve the reductions so that we can stay under the cap, the limits on carbon emissions. Now, we gave them other ways to do it rather than have to do it in the most expensive way. That we said you can buy offsets, but you have to figure out ways to get those reductions. And so we did it in a way to ease the burden so there wouldn't be a real shock to electric ratepayers in this country. We also did it because there are regional differences, and we didn't want the Midwest, that's so reliant on coal-burning electricity, to have to bear the extraordinary burden. Mm-hmm. In my book, I talk about the fight on the Clean Air Act,
sure.
And we were trying to deal with acid rain, which was sulfur emissions from the big power plants in Ohio, and it was carried into the Northeast, killed forests and lakes. It was a real threat to the environment. And there, the industry was giving us such an extraordinarily high figure of what it would cost them to reduce the sulfur emissions that to us it was incredible. So we said we were going to have a cap and trade. You must accomplish the reductions of those sulfur emissions. You can do it in whatever way you want, whatever way that would be the least costly, but it must be done. Mm-hmm. And it was tremendously successful. We don't have a problem of acid rain anymore because that bill worked. Right. And that's the premise of my book. Mm-hmm. A lot of things Congress does works. Government can and must play a fundamentally positive role in people's lives, and we hear too much about the scandals about Congress and not about the fact that some things get done. And we take them for granted, but they do get done.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And your book, we're talking with Congressman Henry Waxman, one of the finest members of the United States House of Representatives. The Waxman report, how Congress really works, isn't so much about the inner workings of it, how the deal-making happens. It's about the accomplishments that you have participated with. We have a half a minute, sir, left. I'm just curious what you see as the biggest issues right before the House right now.
Health care. It is the number one issue for President Obama, as well as
Are we going to get a public option?
We've got to have a public option to get a bill to pass the House of Representatives. I don't know if the Senate will have one, but the President is insisting on a public option. Nobody has to choose the public option, but it ought to be a choice.
Yeah.
And it keeps the private insurance companies honest. and they have a real competitor. So I'm very much for it.
Yep, me too. Well said. Thank you, sir, for your great service to our country all these years in Congress. And let me encourage our listeners to check out your book, The Waxman Report, How Congress Really Works, by Congressman Henry Waxman. Waxman.house.gov, by the way, his website. Congressman, thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you.
Good
Delighted to be
talking
with you.
16 minutes past the hour.